Hello, good morning. There are calls for the Home Secretary to be sacked after she went on the attack against the Metropolitan Police, accusing them of playing favourites when it comes to controlling protests. In an opinion piece for The Times, Suella Braverman doubled down on her views ahead of a pro-Palestinian march planned for Armistice Day this weekend. In the last hour, Sky News has learned that Number 10 didn't fully sign off the article before it was published. More on that in just a moment. But first, let's take a look at her comments. She wrote, "Unfortunately, there is a perception that senior police officers play favourites when it comes to protesters. During COVID, why was it that lockdown objectors were given no quarter by public order police, yet Black Lives Matter demonstrators were enabled, allowed to break rules, and even greeted with officers taking the knee? Right-wing and nationalist protesters who engage in aggression are rightly met with a stern response, yet pro-Palestinian mobs displaying almost identical behaviours are largely ignored, even when clearly breaking the law." Well, our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, joins us now from Westminster. So, Sam, we understand that Number 10 weren't happy with some elements of the article. We don't know what those elements were, but that it was published in its original form.
That's right, Jayne. This is a developing and fast-moving story that we can't really predict where it's going to end up. For most of the morning, it's felt like ministers have been trying to hose down the row caused overnight by Suella Braverman. The Home Secretary has ended up in a place where she appeared, not explicitly, but appeared to be criticising particularly the Metropolitan Police for their different types of treatment towards different types of protesters, which is seen as a pop at Mark Rowley and the Metropolitan Police for letting that pro-Palestinian march on Saturday go ahead. You had a Home Office minister saying that Suella Braverman has full confidence in the Met Chief and that they've been doing a good job, the police have been doing a good job, and also emphasising that they are very concerned about the impression that going on these marches leaves and gives to the Jewish community. So that felt like an attempt to try and contain this row. But as you say, Jayne, in the last half an hour, there has been a development. Sky News has confirmed that Number 10 was sent the article by Suella Braverman's team yesterday. Suella Braverman's team were asked by Number 10 to change some elements of that, but those changes weren't done. In other words, the article that appeared in The Times wasn't fully signed off by Number 10. Now, this whole story really is in part about the marches and part about how to deal with policing, but it's also a story about the power struggle and the power play between the Prime Minister and his Home Secretary. Because on the one hand, you've got a Home Secretary who has repeatedly been saying things and doing things and bluntly setting the news agenda, and often with things that some of the party regard as inflammatory, whether it was the comments about homelessness as a lifestyle choice or other things in the last few weeks. Number 10 then having to decide how they respond. So Number 10 are basically having to decide whether or not they will put up with this kind of flexing of muscles from somebody almost certain to go for the Tory leadership in the event of a Conservative Party defeat, or whether or not to relegate her to the backbenchers now or in a future reshuffle. Labour are calling for Suella Braverman to be sacked and says that the failure of any action is a sign of weakness by the Prime Minister. But let's see as the day develops. I do think that this new development about the article not being signed off properly by Number 10 is a complication that we don't know where it's going to lead.
OK, Sam, thanks so much. Well, as we heard, Suella Braverman's comments on Northern Ireland have drawn criticism. Let's just remind you exactly what she said about that. She said, "I do not believe that these marches are merely a cry for help for Gaza. They are an assertion of primacy by certain groups, particularly Islamists, of the kind we are more used to seeing in Northern Ireland." Also disturbingly reminiscent of Ulster are the reports that some of Saturday's march group organisers have links to terrorist groups, including Hamas. Our senior Ireland correspondent, David Blevins, has the latest response from Belfast.
Well, a former cabinet minister has described these comments as both ignorant and offensive. Many people in Northern Ireland would add dangerous to that list. And that's because the Home Secretary doesn't appear to understand that the vast majority of marches in Northern Ireland are organised by the Protestant loyal orders, those who would regard themselves as the most loyal subjects of the Crown. They're not organised generally by dissident Irish Republicans who continue to pose a terrorist threat, nor does she appear to understand how offensive it is to those Protestant loyal orders who would say they march in defence of their Christian faith to compare them with Islamic extremists. to describe them as hate marches. On the other hand, if she was meaning to refer to the Catholic civil rights marches of the late 60s and 70s, again, she seems to have forgotten that 14 people were shot dead by the British Army on Bloody Sunday in Derry during a civil rights march. That is highly offensive to their families. And I think it is worth reminding people that there is currently a political vacuum in Northern Ireland. There is no power-sharing government in place. The DUP is boycotting Stormont over post-Brexit trading arrangements. And when you have that kind of political vacuum, then the peace becomes more fragile and every word matters. I think the lesson for the Home Secretary and others is not to use Northern Ireland as a case study unless you understand the complexities and the nuances of this place. The Tory government is currently trying to persuade the DUP to go back into the power-sharing government. This language won't do anything to thaw the ice there.